The silence of the silent watch was loud. It was a vacuum left by the cessation of miracles, forcing Adrian to rely solely on the chaotic, beautiful mess of human intuition. He stood on the balcony, the last lingering scent of the merchant's presence fading like old paper. Its work finished, its purpose fulfilled, Sarai murmured, joining him. Her voice, usually sharp as a newly forged blade, held a softness that was still alien to him. Now we begin the real battle. The one fought not with blades but with bureaucracy and budget allocations. Adrian chuckled, the sound a little strained. He took her hand, the ceremonial metal warm against his skin. Just another Thursday indeed. The difference is now I have you to strategize with. Below them the integration began in miniature. Solivar engineers, unable to resist the lure of human chaos, had already dismantled a portion of a makeshift human quantum communicator. They were discussing the merits of phase variance nullifiers over traditional energy dampeners with the zeal of acolytes discovering a new faith. The battle against the Reapers had broken the ice, but only the first layer. The first official meeting of the Interspecies Integration Committee was set for the next morning. It was to be held on the flagship Synthesis, a heavily modified human diplomatic vessel that was now, symbolically, the Joint Command Center. The Council will expect a plan, Adrian, Sarai stated, her focus already professional. They need to see order emerging from the spectacular disorder we created. Doran and the Treaty Keepers will support us, but the Purity faction, even the reformed integration faction under Varric, will be watching for any sign of failure. They'll be looking for us to prioritize one culture over the other, Adrian countered, reviewing the brief he'd mentally prepared. A human strategy would be to throw money and tech at the problem. Massively ambitious, chaotic, and inefficient. A Solivar plan would be hyper-focused, rigid, and slow. We need the synthesis. He moved to the small table, picking up a discarded napkin and a pen. The core problem is not technology or genetics. It's trust and cultural fear. The 3 pillars of synthesis. Our plan needs 3 pillars, Adrian began, tapping the pen on the napkin. First, shared vulnerability. Second, complementary strength. Third, the next generation. Sarai leaned over, her blue-tinged skin casting faint light in the moonlight. Shared vulnerability? That is anathema to the Solivar. It suggests weakness. Exactly, Adrian agreed, a dangerous glint in his eyes. That's why we start there. The Solivar are dying because they refuse to acknowledge a genetic weakness. Humans were laughed off the galactic stage because we refused to acknowledge our violent past. We forced the issue. He looked at her. We begin by establishing joint integration centers. But we don't put them on human worlds or Solivar worlds. We put them on the newest, most unstable colonies, worlds where both our species are equally vulnerable to the environment and require each other for survival. No security blankets. Only shared risk. Sarai considered this, the warrior's frown of immediate rejection giving way to strategic calculation. A high-stakes gamble. If we fail, it confirms every one of Varric's fears. If we succeed, it creates a bond that no treaty ever could, Adrian said, his diplomatic fire back in full blaze. A shared crisis always binds faster than a shared celebration. The next challenge. The official message arrived a moment later, delivered not by a simple comm channel, but by a flickering quantum projection, a trademark of the timekeepers even if this was a lesser signal. It landed softly on the table, shimmering beside the napkin. It was from War Master Doran, curt and formal. Ambassador Cole, Lady Sarai Cole. The committee welcomes your plan. However, before the integration centers can be approved, the first true test of synthesis must be solved. The riddle of the Krellian barrier. The Krellian sector, vital for our combined expansion, remains locked by an ancient, non-functional defense system. Solivar might has failed to breach it. Human complexity has failed to disable it. Failure to pass the Krellian barrier within 72 hours will demonstrate that the Covenant is only a promise, not a reality. Adrian picked up the message, his fingers tracing the quantum symbols. A defense system that Solivar strength couldn't destroy and human tech couldn't crack. A riddle designed by a long-dead species to test adaptability. Sarai's golden eyes narrowed, lighting up with the familiar thrill of imminent combat. A puzzle that requires both chaos and order, brute force and subtle manipulation. A perfect test. She looked at Adrian, a fierce joy returning to her face. Welcome to the honeymoon, husband. It appears we have 3 sunrises to solve the impossible. Adrian smiled, the exhaustion of the wedding and the battle momentarily forgotten. He felt the familiar pull of the challenge, the unique, terrifying joy of being on the galactic stage again, not as a failure but as an architect. He crumpled the napkin with the 3 pillars, the complex plan already irrelevant. 3 sunrises, Adrian repeated, the familiar, reckless confidence back in his voice. Let's show them what happens when a diplomat and a warrior decide to dance. The flagship Synthesis, a sleek, black vessel now bearing both the stylized human comet and the Solivar twin swords, cut through the void toward the Krellian sector. Inside the tactical center, a room rapidly being optimized for 2 different species operational styles, the tension was palpable. Adrian, stripped down to a diplomatic tunic, stood beside Sarai, who was still in her tailored combat suit. On the main screen, the Krellian barrier manifested as a shimmering, multi-layered energy field, silent and utterly impregnable. 72 hours, Sarai stated, running a finger along the holographic projection. The Solivar attacked this system 3 decades ago during the first expansion. We threw everything at it. Fusion bombs, temporal disruptors. Our final conclusion: the barrier is not a defensive shield, it's an entropic anchor. It draws energy from any external force attempting to breach it, stabilizing itself further. Which is why brute force fails, Adrian mused. And human subtlety failed because we treated it like a closed system. Our analysts tried conventional hacking, brute forcing the encryption. They only fed the anchor more computational power. He rubbed his temples. The familiar, low thrum of the watch was gone, replaced by the grating silence of the real world. He missed the quantum guidance, the instant flash of possibility. Now he had to build the path himself. The key is the Krellian species, Adrian said, pulling up historical data. They were pacifists, artists who turned war into elaborate, self-sustaining poetry. Their defense system wouldn't be a simple wall, it would be a trap of logic. It doesn't want to kill or destroy, it wants to preserve its own boundary. If it wants to preserve its boundary, we must give it a reason to unpreserve it, Sarai countered, a dangerous smile touching her lips. If we cannot penetrate the barrier, we make the barrier believe that staying in place is the greater threat to its own survival. Human chaos meets Solivar logic, Adrian said, nodding eagerly. How do we make an entropic anchor fear its own logic? The Krellian barrier is designed to counter external threats, Sarai explained, citing the old Solivar reports. It detects and counters large, aggressive, energy-intensive signatures. We need the opposite, an internal threat, small, unseen and highly complex. A vulnerability in its own code that only chaos can create. Adrian suddenly saw a way forward, a reckless strategy only he, the diplomat who faced warriors with a borrowed knife, would dare to propose. We create a false flag. A miniature, complex, and purely human threat that the barrier doesn't recognize as external aggression, but as an internal malfunction, Adrian declared. A virus, yes, but delivered physically, not through comms. He turned to the engineering station where Solivar technician, Krell, a sharp-featured woman from the integration faction, was managing the ship's systems. Krell, can you configure a small, fast probe, a human-designed scout, perhaps, with a Solivar microwarp drive? We need minimal energy signature upon entry, maximum speed. Impossible, Ambassador, Krell replied immediately. The Solivar drive is unstable on human platforms. The vibrational frequencies conflict. It would destroy itself upon activation. Which is exactly what we need, Adrian said, turning back to Sarai. The virus isn't the data payload. The vibrational conflict is the virus. The barrier will register the probe as a self-destructing internal element, a threat to its structural integrity. It will prioritize neutralizing the internal conflict over defending against an external attack. It's gloriously insane, Sarai breathed, the compliment ringing with genuine approval. The barrier will be forced to dedicate processing power to analyzing and fixing the internal chaos, which gives us a window. Krell, however, remained skeptical. Even if the probe survived the instability long enough to enter, it would be a microsecond window. We cannot breach the barrier's main control node fast enough. We don't need a single breach, Adrian clarified, walking over to the holographic map. We need a diversionary riot. Sarai, you said the Solivar used temporal disruptors decades ago. They failed, but what was the secondary effect? Sarai accessed the old battle data. Localized phase variance. The disruptor's field would momentarily decoherent a small section of the barrier before the entropic anchor stabilized the tear. Perfect, Adrian concluded. When the probe hits and the barrier is busy neutralizing its internal chaos, We hit the same spot with a synchronized low-power temporal pulse. Not to destroy it, but to force a small, momentary dimensional instability. We make the wall jump out of sync just as it's trying to hold itself together. This wasn't just a plan, it was a perfect marriage of their two cultures. The human trickery, the suicidal chaotic probe, followed by the Soul-Evar precision, the synchronized temporal strike. 2 hours remained. The air in the synthesis's tactical center crackled not with fear, but with the focused, exhilarating energy of creation. Adrian and Sarai, side by side, coordinated the final sequence. Krell launched the probe, Adrian commanded, his voice clear and steady. The small, modified scout darted from the synthesis, a tiny flickering comet of unstable energy. It hit the Krellian barrier's shimmering surface. Instead of exploding, the probe was instantly absorbed, and the barrier's glow intensified, not defensively but internally like a fever breaking out in the system. Barrier is focused, Sarai confirmed, watching the internal energy signature shift. It's dedicating 80% of its resources to analyzing the chaotic frequency. Now, Commander Doran, execute the temporal strike. From the nearby Treaty Keeper ship, a thin, almost invisible beam hit the precise point where the probe had entered. For one agonizing second, nothing happened. Then the Krellian barrier did not shatter or explode, it simply flickered, disappearing completely. It was the illusion of a logical wall collapsing under the weight of impossible logic. A triumphant roar erupted in the tactical center. They hadn't overpowered the barrier, they had outsmarted it using synthesis. Ambassador Cole, Krell said, a profound sense of awe replacing her initial doubt. The Krellian sector is open. This is a new kind of victory. Adrian looked at Sarai. Just another day of proving humanity's worth. The Krellian riddle wasn't solved by strength or pure logic. It was solved by knowing when to be recklessly illogical. Sarai leaned in, her eyes shining. A worthy stratagem, husband. But now comes the question. With the barrier down, the first fleet into the sector claims the resources. Who goes first, the human exploratory vessels or the Soul-Evar mining cruisers? Adrian looked at the holographic map, seeing the two rival fleets positioned equidistant from the newly opened sector. He saw a flash of probability, two ships racing, a micro-conflict erupting, and the entire fragile alliance collapsing on its first day of success. He had no watch to tell him the answer, only the steady, terrifying conviction that he could not afford to fail. Neither, Adrian said, walking to the comm station. We send a third. A single, shared vessel. He looked at Sarai. We send the synthesis. We send the synthesis, Adrian repeated into the comms channel, his voice broadcasting across the waiting human and Soul-Evar fleets. Neither human nor Soul-Evar, but both. We claim the sector as the first territory of the Covenant. Sarai didn't hesitate. She immediately issued commands to the bridge crew. Pilot, set course for the Krellian sector, maximum warp. Communications, transmit a joint declaration of claim to all listening vessels. Priority 1, General Varick's flagship. A few moments later, Varick's scarred face appeared on the secondary screen, his expression a complicated mix of suspicion and grudging respect. Ambassador Cole, Varick's growl was audible even over the comm static. You solve a 3-decade-old riddle with a children's trick, and now you leapfrog both our fleets. Is this your human synthesis? Deception masking greed? No, General, Adrian returned, keeping his tone level but firm. It is shared accountability. If the human fleet claims it first, the Soul-Evar believe we stole their victory. If your fleet claims it, the humans see us as the same old aggressive Soul-Evar. Either way, the alliance fractures. We are going in together in a shared vessel to make a shared claim. If any ship fires on the synthesis, they fire on the Covenant itself. Which faction do you represent, General? Purity or integration? Varick studied the screen, the weight of the past generations and the future possibility warring in his eyes. The memory of the Reaper attack, where they fought side by side, was still fresh. The integration faction supports the claim, Varick finally conceded, the word sounding alien coming from him. Our cruisers will maintain the perimeter of the barrier, guarding the new territory against any external threats. Proceed, Ambassador Cole. As Varick's transmission cut out, Sarai looked at Adrian, a flicker of something close to admiration in her golden eyes. You denied him the chance to choose conflict. You forced him into the only honorable course left, protection. That was masterful politics, Adrian Cole. Just adapting to the battlefield, Adrian shrugged, feeling the synthesis jump to warp speed. Human diplomacy is simply warfare fought with assumptions instead of weapons. navigating the first territory. The synthesis dropped out of warp and glided into the Krellian sector. The territory was rich, planets abundant with rare heavy elements, gas giants perfect for energy harvesting, and a surprising number of habitable worlds. The prize was immense, and the implications for the combined species economy were vast. Adrian and Sarai landed on the richest habitable world, a planet now officially designated New Hope. The air was cool and clean, and the sky held twin suns, one blue, one gold, a perfect, silent symbol of their new union. The formal claiming ceremony was simple. They planted a joint flag featuring the combined symbols of the new alliance. But the real challenge awaited them back on the bridge. The fleets are already bickering over resource allocation, Sarai reported hours later, her expression tired. The Sol Ivar need the heavy elements for their shipbuilding protocols. The humans need the habitable worlds for population expansion. Every request is couched in terms of essential cultural necessity. It's a gridlock. Adrian reviewed the data streams. The bickering was meticulous, logical, and utterly intractable. The Sol Ivar were using rigid formulae for resource distribution. The humans were using aggressive, chaotic bidding. Two perfect systems creating a perfect, inevitable stalemate. We can't divide the pie equally, Adrian decided. The Sol Ivar will see equality as disrespect to their greater need for military resources. The humans will see it as a loss of competitive advantage. We have to redefine the pie. He pulled up the map of the sector, highlighting resources that neither side had initially prioritized. The Sol Ivar ships need heavy elements, yes, Adrian pointed out. But their ship design is archaic, built to survive for centuries using pure strength. Their ships are fuel inefficient. The human problem isn't just space, it's energy scarcity. Synthesis, Sarai realized the light dawning. We don't allocate the resources, we allocate the solution. We use the human chaotic approach to build entirely new Sol Ivar ships. Exactly, Adrian confirmed, drawing lines on the map. We propose the following. The human element gets exclusive rights to the habitable worlds, solving our space crisis. In return, the Sol Ivar get exclusive rights to the heavy elements, solving their shipbuilding crisis. But this comes with a condition. All new Sol Ivar ships built with these elements must use newly developed, human-engineered fusion drives, the ones optimized for maximum fuel efficiency. Sarai leaned back, a genuine appreciative smile curving her lips. The Sol Ivar get their precious, high-quality, militaristically essential elements, validating their culture. But in return they are forced to adopt the human chaotic element, our fuel efficiency, which will solve their long-term population decline problem by freeing up resources for their people. You've turned a cultural demand into a synergistic compromise. And the Sol Ivar cannot refuse, Adrian finished. Refusing means they accept their ships are inefficient, something their honor cannot allow. They are forced to evolve, yet they see it as a victory of acquisition. He sent the proposal to the integration committee. Within the hour the gridlock broke. The Sol Ivar, satisfied with the perceived win on military resource control, accepted the compromise. Humanity gained the space it desperately needed. The real work was indeed beginning, but Adrian Cole, the failed diplomat, was proving that the greatest victories weren't won by superior strength or logic, but by designing a solution that made evolution the only honorable option. The diplomatic victory over the Krellian sector allocation was a massive step, yet it only created a temporary equilibrium. Adrian and Sarai knew the honeymoon phase of the alliance was over. The real pressure would come not from external threats, but from internal cultural friction. The problem of the populace. Back on Midnight Station, the hub of the initial Covenant agreement, the public reaction was volatile. The successful integration of resource allocation was a triumph for the politicians, but it felt abstract to the common Sol Ivar and human citizen. The Sol Ivar populace sees their General Varric ceding ground to a human diplomat on core military resource strategy, Sarai explained, reviewing the planetary consensus feeds in their shared quarters. They see it as an erosion of Sol Ivar strength, even if the result is better efficiency. They respect a warrior, they are suspicious of a merchant. Adrian watched a feed from a human colony where a journalist was mocking the Solivar's primitive honor code that forced them into the deal. And the humans see the Sol Ivar getting the best material, the heavy elements, while we're stuck with just planets. The average human freighter pilot doesn't care about the long-term strategic benefits of shared engine technology. They only see the immediate, unequal exchange. The truth was, the synthesis was happening too fast for the populace. The top-down success needed a bottom-up buy-in. We need to show them synthesis in action, not just in spreadsheets, Adrian concluded, pacing the floor. Something tactile, something visible, that involves both people at the street level. We need a shared project that is not military and not economic, something purely cultural. We need to teach them to dance, Sarai realized, quoting the merchant's final words. The Symphony of Two Worlds. The idea came from Sarai, inspired by the crystal art in her quarters and the unexpected harmony of the battle's combined fire. The project would be to create a unified signal beacon, an orbital structure on New Hope that would broadcast a message of peace and alliance to the rest of the galaxy. But the construction itself would be the cultural exchange. The Sol-Ivar have centuries of experience in structural resilience and quantum weaving, Sarai outlined. Their architecture is built to last until the sun dies. The humans have expertise in aesthetic chaos and bioharmonic resonance. Our artists and engineers are experts at turning inefficiency into beauty. Adrian saw the strategy. We don't just build a functional beacon. We build a quantum cathedral. The Sol-Ivar will design the core structure, the foundation, the resilience. The humans will design the surface plating, the harmonic emitters, and the exterior aesthetic, the expression of the signal. The challenge was immediate. The Sol-Ivar construction teams, led by a staunch traditionalist named Elder Kor, worked on immutable, centuries-old principles. They would prioritize density and perfect symmetry. The Human Artistic Guild, led by a notoriously temperamental architect named Vanya, would prioritize asymmetry, fluid lines, and light-capturing surfaces. The conflict erupted on the New Hope orbital platform within hours. This is structural blasphemy. Kor's voice boomed across the comms feed, his team halting work on the perfect octahedron frame. The humans want to sheath our perfect structure in randomly aligned, color-shifting bioresin panels. It violates every principle of long-term integrity. It doesn't violate integrity, it enhances harmonic stability. Vanya screamed back. Your structure is dull. It's a tomb. The message will be lost because the Sol-Ivar design is too pure, too resistant to being read. Adrian and Sarai arrived at the platform, stepping into a volatile standoff. They are both right, and that is the problem, Sarai murmured to Adrian. Kor, your structure is impeccable, built for eternity, Adrian said, addressing the elder. But Vanya is correct. Eternal resilience when broadcasting a message looks like unyielding stasis. The message of the Covenant is not stasis, it is evolution. Vanya, your aesthetic design is beautiful, built for maximum resonance, Sarai countered, addressing the human. But if the structure is compromised by poor foundation, your message is merely ephemeral noise. The Covenant must have roots. Adrian pulled up the holographic schematic of the beacon. He focused on a single point where the Sol-Ivar quantum weaving met the human harmonic emitter arrays. The synthesis is not about compromise, half resin, half metal, Adrian announced. It is about interdependence. Elder Kor, your Sol-Ivar structural principles focus on internal, perfect symmetry. That makes the whole structure redundant if one single node fails. It ensures centuries of stability. Kor argued. But limited potential, Sarai interjected. Vanya, your chaotic panels allow for maximum signal spread and adaptability, but they rely on weak, externally powered nodes. Adrian stabbed a finger at the schematic. We will combine the two. Sol-Ivar weaving becomes the internal power conduit. Instead of the human panels drawing power from an external vulnerable source, the bioresin will interface directly with the excess quantum energy created by the Sol-Ivar's structurally perfect core. The perfection of the Sol-Ivar design will be used to power the chaos of the human expression. Kor's eyes widened. Using their hyper-efficient, military-grade quantum weaving to power non-essential art was anathema, but the proposal offered a solution to a Sol-Ivar design weakness: excess, unusable energy. Vanya, the artist, saw the philosophical beauty. The Sol-Ivar Foundation doesn't just hold the panels, it breathes life into them. It turns our chaos into a perpetual, self-sustaining signal. We become one system. Within minutes, the work resumed, but with a new energy. The Sol-Ivar team began rethreading their core to feed quantum energy to the human sections, while the human artists excitedly started aligning their asymmetrical panels to maximize the energy draw. The beacon would be structurally Sol-Ivar but dynamically human, a true symphony of two worlds. As they watched the project resume, Sarai rested a hand on Adrian's arm. You've not just designed a beacon, Adrian Cole. You've designed the template for integration itself. You've taught our people how to let their perfect structures be powered by beautiful, necessary chaos. It's about making evolution the most logical and most honorable choice, Adrian replied, watching the twin suns set over New Hope. The question is, what happens when someone decides that beautiful chaos needs to be silenced? The success of the unified signal beacon, which Adrian mentally nicknamed the Synthesis Symphony, did not go unnoticed. Its unique quantum harmonic signature was now broadcasting the Alliance's existence and philosophy across a vast swathe of the galaxy, generating curiosity and, inevitably, opposition. The silent opposition. The most immediate backlash came not from open warfare, but from subtle, coordinated political sabotage. General Varick's earlier support had bought them time, but it hadn't silenced the deep-seated prejudices within the wider Sol-Ivar military and conservative political class. "They're attacking us through logistics," Sarai reported to Adrian 2 weeks later, her posture radiating controlled fury. 3 different human Solivar trade treaties, routine agreements necessary for resource sharing, have been mysteriously stalled in the Sol-Ivar legislative bodies. They've found ancient, non-functional, purity veto clauses and are insisting on rigorous, decades-long reviews. "And the human side?" Adrian asked. "Worse. The Arcturus coalition, Ambassador Kresh's faction, is using the stalling as proof that the Sol-Ivar are negotiating in bad faith. They are now threatening to recall their exploratory fleets from the Krellian sector, claiming we violated the spirit of the integration agreement by ceding too much power to alien bureaucracies." Adrian rubbed the bridge of his nose. This was the true nature of integration. Endless, exhausting bureaucratic warfare, designed to drain their political capital and force them into a mistake. "They want us to make a rash move," Adrian said. "They expect the human to bypass the law chaotically, or the Sol-Ivar half of the Alliance to resort to a military ultimatum. Either choice confirms their prejudice and collapses the Covenant. We need a swift, visible solution that respects their antiquated laws while simultaneously making them irrelevant," Sarai countered, pacing. "A surgical strike on the legislative process. The loophole of the ancestors." Adrian remembered a minor detail from his frantic study of Sol-Ivar law before the War Council trial. A loophole so archaic it was only included in the oldest, least-read legal texts. "The veto clauses they're using, the Purity faction didn't invent them," Adrian explained. "They date back to the pre-Covenant era, when the Sol-Ivar were still a collection of squabbling dynasties. If the legislative bodies insist on using the most ancient laws to stall progress, we counter with an even older, more sacred law." He pulled up the obscure text on the holographic display. "The Edict of Unanimity, Section Gamma 9. Sarai's eyes widened as she read the translated text. The Edict of Unanimity, it was used to prevent civil war between the dynasties. It states that any legislative review can be bypassed if the issue in question is deemed existential to the continuity of the sacred line, and is approved by a vested bloodline, with majority support from the existing legislative body. The sacred line is the Covenant itself, established by Kenny the Elder," Adrian pointed out. "And the vested bloodline, that's you, Sarai, as the intended bride. But we still need majority support from the legislative body that is actively stalling us." "We can't force the vote," Sarai said, shaking her head. "They've bought the necessary votes to maintain the deadlock." "We don't force the vote," Adrian countered, a familiar, reckless light in his eyes. "We give them a choice so terrible, so humiliating, that they must vote in our favor to save face. We turn the act of stalling into a public act of cultural betrayal." The unthinkable challenge. The next day, Adrian and Sarai appeared unannounced before the Sol-Ivar Legislative Assembly, the very body that was stalling their treaties. The sight of the human diplomat and the warrior princess together immediately caused a stir. Lady Sarai and Ambassador Cole, the assembly leader, a pompous functionary named Thrax, said coolly, "Your presence is highly irregular. We are in the middle of a comprehensive and necessary review of the trade protocols." "You are engaged in sabotage, Thrax," Sarai cut in, her voice dangerously calm. "You use obsolete laws to cripple an alliance that safeguards our species' continuity. Therefore we invoke the Edict of Unanimity." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Thrax's composure faltered. "That edict is ceremonial. It requires a vote of existential continuity, which we will deny." Adrian stepped forward, cutting him off. "You will not deny it, Thrax. Not unless you wish to admit publicly that you value your petty political vendettas above the honor of the sacred line." Adrian paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the final, devastating blow, a challenge drawn from the most unforgiving Sol-Ivar tradition, where failure meant absolute disgrace. Lady Sarai, as the vested bloodline, demands that the legislative body cease its obstructive actions. If you continue to stall the treaties, she will interpret your action as a public declaration that this entire legislative body deems itself unworthy to uphold Sol-Ivar law. He lowered his voice, making the next words resonate in the silent chamber. You will all publicly submit yourselves to the ritual of unmaking. The assembly instantly dissolved into shocked murmurs. The ritual of unmaking was an ancient, career-ending disgrace where disgraced politicians had to publicly burn their ceremonial robes, resign all titles, and live out their remaining years in silent, isolated exile. It was cultural and political annihilation. You cannot threaten, Thrax stammered, his face pale. We do not threaten, Sarai said, her voice like grinding stone. We offer you a choice. Either you vote to approve the treaties, acknowledging the covenant is existential, or you choose the unmaking, admitting you are the true threat to our continuity. The vote must be taken now. Let the galaxy witness your honor. The legislators, all of whom valued power and prestige above all else, realized they were trapped. They could not risk the shame of the unmaking. They had to choose life, political life, by siding with the covenant. Within 3 minutes, the votes were cast. The treaties were passed, the purity veto clauses rendered instantly null and void. As the chamber emptied in disarray, Sarai looked at Adrian. You used our people's greatest fear, dishonor, to force their greatest necessity, evolution. They will hate us for this. Let them hate us, Adrian replied, a weary but satisfied smile touching his lips. As long as they hate us while working together, the synthesis is winning. The legislative victory was a Pyrrhic one, a political maneuver that bought the covenant essential time and legal legitimacy, but generated a deep undercurrent of resentment among the Sol-Ivar elite. Adrian and Sarai knew they had burned a significant bridge, and the next challenge wouldn't come from bureaucracy. It would come from a direct confrontation with the consequences of their synthesis. The trade protocols, now legally ratified, immediately put the integration plan into action. One of the first projects was the establishment of a joint quantum research facility, QRF, on the newly claimed planet New Hope. This facility was intended to merge Sol-Ivar precision engineering with human experimental quantum theory, accelerating both species' technological development. However, the hurried nature of the integration, forced by Adrian's maneuver, led to friction on the ground. The Sol-Ivar team, led by a renowned yet deeply conservative physicist named Dr. Kale, insisted on rigidly following safety protocols that had been in place for centuries. The human team, led by a brilliant but anarchic theoretical expert named Dr. Lee, viewed these protocols as stifling and unnecessary, often bypassing them to gain incremental research speed. The result was an inevitable, catastrophic error. The QRF is experiencing cascading dimensional instability, Commander Walsh's frantic voice cut through the comms one afternoon. Lee's team pushed the Sol-Ivar containment field past its theoretical limit, trying to stabilize a hypervariable quantum state. The containment failed. We have a localized quantum tear forming over the facility. Adrian and Sarai, aboard the synthesis, immediately diverted course. A quantum tear, a small, unstable wound in spacetime, was a low-level version of the weapon the Reapers had threatened to deploy. It wouldn't swallow the planet whole, but it would unleash dimensional radiation and destabilize the local gravity, making the QRF and the surrounding settlement uninhabitable. Casualty projections? Sarai demanded. Minimal on the Sol-Ivar side, thanks to their excessive, and apparently necessary, containment redundancies, Walsh reported grimly. But Lee's entire team is still inside the experimental core. They were relying on human phase shields, which are now collapsing. This was the crisis the opposition had been waiting for. It was a direct consequence of human chaos and Sol-Ivar order failing to integrate safely. If Adrian couldn't fix it, the integration faction would be shattered, and the Sol-Ivar assembly would move swiftly to revoke the treaties based on human liability. We need a localized dimensional stabilizer, Adrian said, reviewing the tier's energy signature. Something with enough mass and precise frequency to collapse the tier before it expands. Our ships have the mass, but the frequency modulation required is too specific, Sarai countered, her hand instinctively resting on her sheathed sword, a habit even in technological crisis. We need something designed to interact with pure possibility, something like the watch. But the watch is silent, Adrian reminded her, running his hand over his empty wrist. Its quantum anchor is passive now. I can't use it to collapse spacetime. Sarai's mind was racing, drawing on the memory of the Krellian barrier, where human chaos had been deliberately used as a destabilizing force. The synthesis beacon. It's broadcasting a quantum harmonic signature designed to merge Sol-Ivar resilience with human chaos. It's too far away, Adrian exclaimed. The signal delay is too great. The tier will expand beyond control before the signal can modulate it. No, not the signal, Sarai clarified, her golden eyes blazing with insight. The beacon itself. The structure is pure Sol-Ivar resilience, its external panels are pure human chaotic resonance, and its core is actively powered by the quantum overflow from Elder Core's weaving. It is the purest, most stable form of the synthesis we have built. We need to move the entire symphony to New Hope. The plan was monumental and insane. They would use the combined forces of the synthesis and Varric's nearby cruisers, still maintaining perimeter control, to tow the massive, fragile beacon from its orbit and drop it directly onto the QRF settlement on New Hope. Adrian immediately contacted General Varric, laying out the situation. You propose using a valuable infrastructure project, our finest example of Sol-Ivar engineering, as a glorified, suicidal anchor? Varric's voice was heavy with skepticism. I propose using your people's greatest strength, structural resilience, to save a settlement created by human innovation, Adrian retorted, using Varric's own language of honor. If the tier stabilizes, the synthesis is validated. If we fail, both the beacon and the QRF are lost, but we prove that Sol-Ivar honor prioritizes life above all else. General, do you protect the symbol of the Covenant, or do you protect the lives of your people? Varric paused, the dilemma stark. We tow the structure. But if this maneuver fails, Ambassador Cole, the political cost will be yours alone to bear. Within the hour, the colossal beacon was being dragged across the void. As they approached New Hope, the tier grew larger, a twisting vortex of purple and black above the QRF. Impact in 60 seconds, Sarai commanded, piloting the synthesis with fierce precision. The beacon must land precisely over the tier's projected center of mass. Too far and it's useless. Too close and the tier consumes the tug ships. As the beacon descended, it began to sing, not the intended harmonic signal, but a low, throbbing quantum moan as its Sol-Ivar-woven structure fought the destabilizing gravity of the tear. 10 seconds. Dr. Lee's team is still inside the QRF. Walsh screamed. They're too deep, we can't extract them conventionally. Sarai's knuckles were white on the controls. Adrian stared at the screen, running 1,000 probabilities, all leading to failure. Then he thought of the chaos Vanya had introduced, the asymmetrical bioresin panels. Sarai. We're not using the Sol-Ivar structure to collapse the tier, we're using the human resonance to attract it. Adrian shouted. Hit the beacon with a low-frequency sonic pulse, just enough to excite the bioresin panels. Turn the symphony into a quantum lure. Sarai didn't ask why, she executed the command instantly. A low, gentle sonic pulse hit the beacon. The chaotic bioresin panels, designed for adaptability, immediately began vibrating, creating an asymmetrical quantum noise. The tier, drawn to the unique instability, shifted, centering itself precisely on the beacon. The moment the tier's energy core collided with the beacon's pure Sol-Ivar-woven structure, the tier didn't explode or collapse. It simply stitched itself closed. The beacon, acting as a perfect dimensional anchor, absorbed the destabilizing energy and collapsed the wound in spacetime, stabilizing the region instantly. The beacon was scarred, its resonance temporarily muted but intact. As the dust settled, the silence was profound. The tier is gone, Walsh whispered in disbelief. The QRF is intact. Lee's team is stable. Varric's image reappeared, his face now etched with profound bewilderment. You used disharmony to achieve stability. You turned a civilian structure into a dimensional weapon. This is terrifying. No, General, Sarai replied, her breathing steadying. It is synthesis. Human chaos was the lure. Sol-Ivar resilience was the anchor. Neither could have done it alone. They had averted disaster, but the consequences were immediate. Dr. Kale, the Sol-Ivar physicist, resigned immediately, citing irreconcilable risk. But Dr. Lee, the human theoretician, emerged from the QRF, a wild, ecstatic look in his eyes. Ambassador Cole, Lady Sarai, Lee announced, that anchor, the beacon, it didn't just stabilize the tier. It absorbed the energy. We now have the template for a stable, portable dimensional drive. The very problem that defeated the Timekeepers decades ago. Your chaos has gifted us the future. The Alliance was saved, but the opposition now had a face. They needed a new, larger battlefield to settle this conflict once and for all. The successful stabilization of the quantum tier, and the accidental discovery of the stable dimensional drive template catapulted the Covenant into the galactic spotlight. Dr. Lee's ecstatic discovery validated the entire synthesis philosophy, making the integration an undeniable scientific necessity. However, the opposition, now galvanized by the threat of inevitable change, was ready to strike at the deepest root of the alliance: the Solivar identity. The Purity faction, led by a collection of hardline generals and traditionalists who viewed General Varric as a traitor, launched a carefully orchestrated psychological and political attack. They didn't target Adrian or the treaties, they targeted Sarai's claim to the Vorkanii dynasty. "They are invoking the trial of lineage," Sarai informed Adrian, her voice sharp with ancient anger. They were back on Midnight Station, preparing for the inevitable public relations war. "It's a tradition older than the Covenant. It argues that if a dynast's actions, specifically marrying an outsider, bring unprecedented change, they must prove the strength of their ancestral bloodline against an acceptable rival." "Unprecedented change is the entire point," Adrian countered, reviewing the archaic legal text. "Who is the rival?" "General Terran. A powerful, decorated tactician who believes the only true path to Solivar survival is pure strength," Sarai stated, a muscle twitching in her jaw. "The trial isn't a simple duel. It's a three-part cultural and martial test designed to demonstrate that Terran's pure bloodline is inherently superior to my diluted one." Adrian immediately saw the trap. If Terran won, the integration faction would lose all legitimacy, Sarai would be stripped of her dynastic rights, and the Covenant, dependent on her vested bloodline status, would be legally invalidated. "The opposition wants this to be a Solivar-only fight," Adrian realized. "If I intervene, it validates their claim that the Solivar can't defend themselves, and the alliance is just human manipulation. You have to fight Terran, and you have to win by demonstrating a synthesis that Terran cannot touch." The 3 stages. The trial was set to take place on a neutral, isolated asteroid station favored by the Solivar military aristocracy. The atmosphere was formal, oppressive, and utterly hostile to the idea of integration. 1. The test of history, pure Solivar. The first challenge was purely academic, a public debate on the ethics of Solivar warfare. Terran, a master of military history, argued that the Solivars' decline began when they allowed empathy to cloud their tactical judgment. He cited centuries of flawless strategy built on unwavering, uncompromising strength. Sarai, knowing she could not argue against pure strength, used the lesson Adrian had taught her during the Corvin scenario. "General Terran speaks of strength in victory," Sarai stated coolly. "But I speak of strength in survival. Our ancestors were strong enough to defeat their enemies, but they were not strong enough to survive their own obsolescence. The ethics of warfare must evolve from achieving glory to achieving continuity. An ethical choice is one that allows the line to persist, even if it requires the temporary acceptance of dishonor." Terran, unable to argue against the ultimate imperative of continuity, was forced onto the defensive. Sarai, using the core Solivar value of survival to justify evolution, won the first stage by redefining the terms of honor. 2. The test of tactics, Solivar meets human. The second stage was a joint strategic exercise, a high-speed simulation of a complex star system defense against a multi-vector enemy attack. Terran led a team of 3 elite Solivar commanders, relying on traditional, rigid, massed-fire formations. Sarai did something unthinkable. She selected 1 Solivar commander and 2 human diplomats, Adrian's old colleagues, to staff her tactical station. The crowd murmured in open contempt. Terran's pure Solivar strategy was efficient, eliminating the enemy with focused firepower. But his plan was inflexible. Sarai's plan, guided by Adrian's human diplomats, was a mess of feints, misdirection, and calculated vulnerabilities. They scattered their forces, relying on information warfare and economic baiting, tactics Terran dismissed as cowardice. But the chaotic feints drew Terran's rigid forces into traps, costing him excessive resources in the simulation. Sarai's plan resulted in less overall enemy destruction, but a 90% preservation of her own resources and a quicker victory condition. Sarai had demonstrated that the human method, efficient preservation, was superior to the Solivar method, glorious destruction, in a modern context. Stage 2 went to Sarai. 3. The test of synthesis, the final duel. The final challenge was the physical duel, the ultimate Solivar measure of worth. Terran, a mountain of scarred muscle, faced Sarai, promising to end the perversion of the Covenant with a single strike. Sarai wore her traditional armor, but she carried neither her ancestral sword nor the borrowed knife from Adrian. She carried a single modified energy scepter, a weapon traditionally used by Soul Eater timekeepers for ceremonial purposes, not combat. Terran charged with overwhelming millennia-honed strength. Sarai moved not to block, but to deflect, shifting her center of gravity in a fluid, human-like manner. She used the scepter not as a blade but as a harmonic tuning fork. Every time Terran's powerful blade connected, Sarai used the scepter to modulate the metal's natural frequency. She didn't parry the force, she used the resonant chaos to destabilize the blade's molecular structure for a millisecond, causing Terran's own energy to briefly fracture his weapon's integrity. It wasn't physical strength, it was applied physics and chaotic intuition. Finally, Terran committed to a final, crushing overhead strike. Sarai dropped low, sidestepping the blade, and pressed the scepter against the joint of Terran's ancient, reinforced armor. She didn't stab, she simply activated the scepter's full harmonic output. The Solivar-made device, powered by Soul Eater energy, turned its own perfection against itself. Terran's armor, designed for maximum resilience, suddenly resonated against its own core frequency. The armor became a cage of pure vibration, forcing the general to drop his weapon and fall to his knees, utterly defeated but unharmed. "General Terran," Sarai announced, standing over him, "your strength is pure but it is brittle. My line is strong enough to use your own principles against you. I have used Soul Eater tradition, the scepter, human chaos, the deflection, and the necessity of continuity, survival, to defeat you. The trial of lineage is complete." The crowd was silent, stunned not by violence, but by the sheer, undeniable superiority of synthesis. Sarai hadn't just won, she had evolved the Soul Eater understanding of strength itself. The covenant was not merely accepted, it was now proven to be the stronger lineage. The defeat of General Terran was definitive. It wasn't merely a personal loss for the warrior, it was a conceptual loss for the entire Purity faction. Sarai had leveraged their most sacred traditions to prove that their path, pure strength and stasis, was now an obsolete weakness compared to the dynamic, adaptive power of synthesis. Following the trial, the political landscape shifted irrevocably. General Terran, accepting the ritualistic verdict, publicly endorsed Sarai and the Covenant, instantly dissolving the core opposition. The integration faction was now dominant. Adrian and Sarai returned to Midnight Station, not just as partners, but as the recognized architects of the new galactic order. Their lives, however, were still dictated by the relentless demands of interspecies integration. They were now functioning essentially as co-regents of the burgeoning alliance. One evening, while reviewing complex trade route projections, a task that felt bizarrely mundane after defeating dimensional pirates and Soul Eater generals, Sarai stopped, looking at Adrian's wrist where the watch used to be. "I haven't felt truly safe since the trial," she admitted, her guard lowered only in his presence. Terran was the last official challenge. The next threat will be one we cannot anticipate, one that is truly external to our current understanding of the galaxy. Adrian nodded. "The merchant's warning. The path we chose is brilliant but dangerous. We removed the time-traveling safety net. We are now truly alone." As he spoke, a flicker of light caught his eye. It wasn't the quantum flash of the merchant, but a subtle, structural anomaly near the door. Standing there, silent as entropy, was Keeper, the ancient Soul Eater timekeeper who had overseen their initial trials. Keeper approached slowly, moving with the careful precision of someone carrying a tremendous, invisible weight. She carried nothing but an unadorned, metallic sphere that hummed with latent power. "You speak of safety nets, Ambassador Cole," Keeper said, her voice ancient and resonant. "The net was removed, yes. But the tool remains." She placed the sphere on the table. The watch was merely a conduit, a training implement created by Marcus Trent. It showed you the immediate possibilities and taught you to trust the blend of human intuition and quantum reality. But it was only capable of viewing near-time probabilities. "What is this?" Sarai asked, her hand instinctively moving toward a hidden sheath. "This is the core anchor," Keeper explained. "The device that controls the most fundamental timekeeper technology. It is capable of viewing the entire ocean of possibilities, the full spectrum of the future, past, and parallel realities." Adrian stared at the sphere. "Why are you showing us this? I thought the timekeepers were retiring from direct interference." "We are," Keeper confirmed, her ancient eyes fixing on Adrian. "The timekeepers were never meant to be guardians of the future, only stewards of potential. Our time is ending. The path of pure observation has become too brittle, too vulnerable to stasis. The synthesis demands a new approach. She turned the core anchor toward him. The original watch chose you because of your intuition for chaos and your ability to choose the improbable path. Sarai's strength is her unwavering commitment to continuity. Together, you are the perfect anchors for this device. Keeper's gaze was solemn. The trial of lineage was the final test. You proved that the lineage of the Covenant, the lineage of adaptation, is the strongest. My duties are complete. I am passing the stewardship of the Timekeepers to the Alliance. To you. You want us to be the Timekeepers? Adrian asked, astonished. We are diplomats, warriors, not interdimensional observers. The merchant warned you, the next threats will be the ones you cannot anticipate, Keeper said softly. The galaxy has taken notice. There are entities who exist far beyond the reach of Solivar fleets or human politics. Entities who seek to collapse the freedom of choice itself. You need a way to see their movements. You need a way to choose the impossible path before it even appears. She gestured toward the core anchor. This device does not tell you what to do. It merely shows you the true cost and consequence of every choice. It offers the Alliance the ability to integrate not just cultures, but time itself into its strategy. Keeper then looked at Sarai. Lady Sarai, you are the keeper of the line. Ambassador Cole, you are the keeper of the choice. Your marriage is the perfect nexus of order and chaos, continuity and adaptation. Will you accept this burden? Will you become the keepers of synthesis? The weight of the future, far heavier than any ceremonial armor, descended upon them. They had achieved their goal, the Covenant was secure. But now they were being asked to accept a role far beyond that of mere regents, guardians not of the Alliance, but of the very streams of possibility that powered their future. Adrian looked at Sarai. The question was not about politics or honor, it was about the impossible choice that defined their bond. Sarai met his gaze, her golden eyes reflecting the humming light of the core anchor. A true Solivar warrior never flinches from a necessary burden. We accepted the Covenant fully with all it entails, she stated. If the cost of protecting our people's evolution is the stewardship of time, then we accept. We will be the keepers of synthesis. Adrian placed his hand on the metallic sphere beside Sarai's. The sphere did not warm like the watch. It felt cold, vast and infinitely patient. As he touched it, the walls of the room dissolved and he saw not mere moments but the sprawling, complex web of galactic history, the true ocean of possibilities, now laid bare before the failed diplomat and the warrior princess. Keeper bowed deeply, a gesture of respect and finality. Then the new age has begun. Go, the universe awaits your first impossible choice. She faded from the room, leaving them alone with the cold, silent power of the core anchor, and the dizzying, terrifying responsibility of their infinite future. The first impossible choice. The core anchor hummed, bathing the room in a dizzying, nonlinear light. For Adrian, the experience was overwhelming. The past, present, and future flowed into a singular, incomprehensible wave. Sarai, however, felt the anchor as a cold, sharp certainty, a constant against the chaotic information stream. The web of history is vast, Adrian breathed, struggling to focus. I see 1,000,000 timelines for every breath we take. Focus on the threads that threaten the Covenant's line, Sarai commanded, her voice steady. She placed her hand firmly on the sphere, grounding its infinite power in her warrior's focus. What is the next unanticipated threat? The anchor responded, projecting a holographic matrix above the sphere. It showed a cluster of distant, previously unknown star systems, the Veiled Rim. Within this cluster, a subtle but accelerating quantum resonance was building. It's not a fleet, it's a frequency, Adrian realized, zooming in on the anomaly using his newly acquired perspective. It's a signal designed to specifically destabilize the dimensional drives Dr. Lee just perfected. Sarai's gaze was lethal. A countermeasure. Someone anticipated our technological leap. Worse, Adrian countered, his face grim. The frequency is specifically targeting the human-engineered fusion component married to the Solivar containment field. If the drives destabilize, they won't just fail. They'll create localized, explosive quantum feedback loops across the Alliance fleet simultaneously. The threat was a masterpiece of sabotage. It targeted the very essence of their synthesis, turning their greatest achievement into their greatest weakness. The signal wasn't just damaging the Alliance, it was disproving the synthesis on a massive, deadly scale. Who? Sarai demanded. Adrian tracked the source through the anchor's matrix. The signal originated from a small, isolated dynasty within the Veiled Rim, known as the Syndicate of Ethel. They are extreme isolationists. They despise all forms of interstellar integration. They view the alliance as an infectious blight. Tactical solution is simple, Sarai stated. We preemptively strike the syndicate's relay before the frequency reaches critical mass. We launch a full-scale Solivar assault, quick, precise, overwhelming force. As she spoke, the core anchor immediately flashed a new set of probabilities above the syndicate's system. Timeline A, Solivar assault success rate is 98%. The syndicate is destroyed. Consequence: the rest of the Veiled Rim, dozens of neutral, isolationist civilizations, witness Solivar aggression and immediately form a hostile military bloc against the Alliance. The Covenant is crippled by a vast, long-term external war. Pure strength leads to long-term failure, Adrian muttered, seeing the domino effect. We can't use the Solivar approach. Then we use the human approach, Sarai suggested, adapting quickly. We deploy human infiltration teams, chaotic diplomacy, and misinformation to cripple their political structure internally before the signal is ready. Timeline B, human chaos success rate is 60%. Consequence: the syndicate's security protocols are too robust for conventional human hacking. The infiltration fails, the signal broadcasts, and the Alliance fleet is instantly destroyed by the feedback loop. Chaos alone is insufficient, Adrian sighed. We need a path that is neither pure Solivar strength nor pure human chaos. We need a synthesis solution that doesn't exist yet. The impossible synthesis. Adrian focused on the core anchor, not looking for a third path, but for a hidden vulnerability in the Ethel Syndicate itself. He looked through the timelines of the Syndicate, seeking a point of weakness. The Syndicate is built on pure frequency stability, Adrian observed. They worship perfect, unchanging resonance. They designed this countermeasure based on the assumption that our drives require perfect stability to function. And they are right, Sarai said. If the frequency hits, the drives become unstable and explode. But what if we embrace instability? Adrian's eyes lit up with the reckless creativity Sarai had come to admire. The Syndicate expects us to fight the frequency or destroy the source. What if we use the core anchor to temporarily invert the function of our dimensional drives? Invert them? Yes. We use the Ethel frequency, their weapon, to deliberately destabilize our drives, but only for a millisecond, creating a perfectly controlled, chaotic quantum jump, Adrian explained rapidly. The Syndicate's weapon becomes our fuel. It forces our fleet to leap across impossible distances, bypassing their relays and appearing directly over their command center. The core anchor immediately flashed a new probability. Timeline C, synthesis jump success rate is 75%. Consequence: the leap is unpredictable and extremely dangerous. But if successful, the Alliance fleet lands directly on the Syndicate's home world, paralyzing their command structure before the hostile frequency can propagate. It requires the core anchor to precisely modulate the Ethel frequency across the entire Alliance fleet simultaneously, Sarai stated, looking at the sphere. We'd have to use this power on a massive scale for the first time. And it requires the fleet to trust a completely chaotic, unpredictable jump, knowing that failure means certain destruction, Adrian added. It's the ultimate test of faith in the synthesis. Then we must be the ones to execute the jump, Sarai decided. We will personally pilot the synthesis through the induced instability, proving that the keepers of synthesis are not afraid of the chaos they command. They prepared the coordinates, the infinite power of the core anchor humming under their joined hands. The first choice of the new timekeepers was the most terrifying, using their enemy's perfect stability against them by choosing perfect, controlled chaos. The core anchor pulsed, its vast temporal energy contained only by the will of the two keepers. The fate of the entire Alliance fleet, now poised to test the unstable dimensional drives, rested on Adrian and Sarai's ability to perfectly modulate the Syndicate's hostile frequency. The quantum leap. Aboard the synthesis, the bridge was a hub of controlled chaos. Sarai was at the helm, her focus absolute, while Adrian stood over the core anchor, his mind already stretching across the distance to the Alliance fleet. General Varric reports all ships are ready for the induced instability, Sarai stated, her voice tight. Their internal monitors are screaming warnings. Their trust is fragile, Adrian. It has to be perfect, Adrian muttered, focusing on the Syndicate's signal, which was already accelerating towards a critical broadcast level. He could see the hostile frequency as a wave of cold, sterile order, the antithesis of their living synthesis. The Ethel frequency hits in T-minus 60 seconds. He began feeding the anchor the complex modulation sequence. This wasn't merely counter-programming, it was re-engineering the enemy's attack into an escape route. The core anchor would momentarily override the safety protocols of every dimensional drive in the fleet, using the incoming destructive frequency to trigger a unique, nonlinear jump. 30 seconds, Sarai counted. The frequency wave is in range. Adrian felt the hostile signal hit the synthesis, a jarring blast of pure computational malice. The ship's internal systems shuddered. Now, Adrian commanded. He channeled the ethel frequency through the core anchor and broadcast the inverted signal across the fleet. Instead of destroying the human Salivar drives, the fusion of the hostile frequency and the anchor's temporal modulation forced the drives into a state of controlled, momentary quantum frenzy. On the main screen, the Alliance fleet didn't jump into hyperspace. They simply vanished. Status of the jump? Sarai demanded, her eyes glued to the temporal projections. Complete, Adrian confirmed, wiping sweat from his brow. The energy drain from the anchor was immense, leaving a vacuum of silence in its wake. The entire fleet bypassed the ethel relays. They've appeared in the orbit of the Syndicate homeworld. Timeline C is successful. The Syndicate of Ethel was caught completely off guard. Their strategy relied on the slow, inevitable propagation of their frequency. They never anticipated a fleet could appear instantaneously in their command system, having used their own weapon as the fuel. The subsequent engagement was swift. The Alliance, led by General Varric, did not resort to the wholesale destruction projected in Timeline A. Instead, they used the element of surprise to execute a precision strike, neutralizing the Syndicate's core command and the broadcasting relay before reinforcements could arrive. The Syndicate, built on rigid order and predictable defense, had no protocol for perfect chaos. Varric's transmission arrived shortly after. His voice, for once, lacked any trace of doubt. Ambassador Cole, Lady Sarai, Varric's face, usually stern, held a mix of awe and bewilderment. We experienced an event that defies every known principle of Soliver navigation. We were told to trust the chaos. We trusted it. We are victorious. The Syndicate has surrendered. This changes everything, even our understanding of the universe. The Keepers of Synthesis had passed their first true test, establishing themselves not just as political leaders, but as active manipulators of probability. The cost and the consequence. Back on Midnight Station, the political repercussions were immediate and positive. The Veiled Rim, witnessing the impossible victory and the Alliance's restraint, the Syndicate was disarmed, not destroyed, sent envoys seeking diplomatic ties. The Covenant gained legitimacy and powerful new trade partners. However, the cost of wielding the core anchor was significant. The anchor is demanding a heavy temporal toll. Keeper's projection materialized beside the now glowing sphere. Manipulating the ethel frequency on that scale required pulling stability from other timelines. Specifically, two small, fragile, highly chaotic realities were collapsed to fuel the jump. Adrian felt a genuine pang of guilt. We destroyed entire realities? No, Keeper corrected gently. You collapsed possibilities. Realities that existed only marginally, based on minute, unstable decisions. You chose the brightest future for your line, but that choice required the sacrifice of faint alternatives. This is the ultimate burden of the Keeper. Every choice creates a debt of lost possibilities. Sarai, ever pragmatic, accepted the burden. We made the necessary choice for the continuity of the Covenant. But we must never choose out of convenience, only out of existential necessity. Adrian touched the anchor, feeling the weight of the lost possibilities. He was no longer just a diplomat fighting for survival. He was a guardian of the future, constantly negotiating with the streams of time. We need a name for the next phase of the Covenant, Adrian said, looking at Sarai. It can't just be integration. It has to reflect our new role. Sarai smiled, a fierce, clear look of resolution in her eyes. We used chaos to ensure continuity. We used the impossible to make the future inevitable. We call it the age of the impossible choice. The core anchor hummed, settling into a low, steady pulse. The age of the impossible choice had begun, and the failed diplomat and the warrior princess stood ready to guard the future from everything, even time itself. The silent threat. The success of the quantum jump brought a fragile peace, but it also painted a clear target on the backs of the Keepers of Synthesis. Adrian and Sarai understood that the cost of manipulating probability was eternal vigilance. One standard rotation after the ethel victory, the core anchor pulsed with a low, agonizing frequency, displaying a deep-time anomaly that wasn't a threat of immediate destruction, but of slow, political strangulation. It's not a fleet, it's a disease of information, Adrian summarized, studying the temporal projection. The anomaly was centered on Ambassador Kresh of the Arcturus Coalition, the crystalline diplomat who had been so skeptical of humanity. Kresh's timeline was undergoing subtle, targeted corruption. The Arcturus Coalition is key to our expansion, Sarai noted. They control the primary trade nexus leading to the Krellian sector. If Kresh turns hostile, he can veto our resource claims and economically isolate the Covenant. The anchor revealed the perpetrator, a sophisticated, almost invisible network of human extremists called the Purist Collective. This group was composed of former military hardliners and disgruntled diplomats who viewed the alliance as a betrayal of human superiority, mirroring the Solivar Purity faction. They were feeding Kresh, a being who lived by data and crystalline integrity, a constant stream of perfectly plausible, fabricated data designed to prove Solivar treachery. They aren't just lying, they're creating synthetic history, Adrian realized. The fabricated data streams are so consistent, so perfectly ordered, that Kresh's crystalline logic accepts them as truth. He's not being bribed, he's being logically converted. The core anchor projected a critical timeline. Kresh was scheduled to deliver a condemnation of the Covenant to the Galactic Senate in 48 hours, based entirely on the false data. If he spoke, the Alliance would lose the critical Arcturus trade nexus, setting them back decades. We cannot expose the Purist Collective directly, Sarai determined. If we accuse human diplomats of sabotage, the Solivar will seize on the claim, proving the Purist's point that humans cannot be trusted. It collapses the Covenant from the inside. We must use chaos to expose their order, Adrian mused, drawing on the lesson from the Synthesis Symphony. Kresh trusts data consistency. We have to introduce an element of perfect chaos into his internal databanks. A single piece of contradictory information so profoundly illogical that it fractures his faith in the entire stream. The paradoxical truth. Adrian focused on Kresh's crystalline structure, which functioned as both his mind and his data storage. He needed a lie that looked like the truth, delivered by the truth itself. The Purist Collective is using perfectly ordered data to sell a lie, Adrian said. We will use true history presented as perfect chaos to discredit their order. He used the core anchor to locate the single most embarrassing, chaotic, and utterly true piece of information in all of human Solivar history. A story so absurd it was usually dismissed as myth. The time a young Marcus Trent, during the first contact attempt centuries ago, accidentally sent the Solivar War Master a human cooking show instead of his final treaty proposal, causing a massive diplomatic incident that took years to resolve. The Great Stew Diplomacy, Sarai recalled, barely suppressing a smile. A legend of human ineptitude. The purists have edited all historical archives to remove that embarrassing truth, replacing it with a neat, rationalized explanation of Trent's genius, Adrian explained. We use the anchor to temporarily reintroduce the original, chaotic, embarrassing data stream into Kresh's mind, the unedited video of Marcus Trent explaining how to perfectly dice an onion while a Solivar War Master waited for a peace treaty. The maneuver was incredibly risky. It required the anchor to override Kresh's mental firewalls with a blast of pure, undiluted, absurd truth. If we fail, we could permanently damage Kresh's crystalline psyche, Sarai warned. If we fail to act, the alliance is finished, Adrian countered. Kresh must see the truth, but it must be presented in a way that confirms the fundamental chaos of human nature. A chaos that, ironically, the purists have eliminated to sell their lie. The fracture. Adrian channeled the core anchor's energy, targeting Kresh, who was preparing his damning address. The anchor didn't fight the purist data stream. It simply layered the chaotic truth of the Great Stew Diplomacy over the meticulously crafted synthetic history. Kresh, a being of crystalline order, suddenly experienced a profound cognitive dissonance. His mind, which had accepted the purist's perfectly ordered but false data, was now confronted with a single perfectly true, yet utterly illogical memory. Marcus Trent, the architect of the Covenant, worrying more about the bouquet garni than the fate of two species. The contradiction was too great. Kresh's crystalline structure shimmered, experiencing a fracture of pure logic. He stepped onto the Senate podium, ready to deliver his condemnation. But instead of citing the meticulously prepared purist data, Kresh simply stopped. Ambassador Kresh, the Senate president prompted. Kresh looked out at the assembly, his voice hesitant. My data, my continuity. I have discovered an anomaly, he declared. A fundamental contradiction in the historical record regarding the original Covenant negotiation. The records I have been relying upon exhibit perfect, yet ultimately flawed, order. They lack the necessary ingredient of human chaos. he continued, his voice ringing with a newfound, terrifying clarity. Any history so perfectly ordered that it eliminates the possibility of absurd, essential truth, such as the crucial importance of properly boiling a stock, is, by its nature, a lie of stasis. The covenant is messy. It is chaotic. It is illogical. Therefore it is true. Kresh concluded, not with a condemnation, but with a surprising resolution. The Arcturus coalition will maintain the trade nexus. But we will now subject the entire alliance trade protocol to a thorough, chaotic audit, focusing specifically on elements that appear to be too perfectly ordered. We will search for the necessary human flaws that validate the Soul Evar strengths. The Purist Collective's plan had backfired spectacularly. Their perfect lie was undone by a chaotic, irrelevant truth, and the Arcturus coalition was now actively hunting for flaws, not to destroy the covenant but to validate its synthesis. Sarai stepped beside Adrian, watching the broadcast. You won by introducing necessary shame into the historical record. You forced their logic to accept its own failure. The cost, Adrian? Only a few minutes of Marcus Trent's culinary dignity, Adrian sighed, feeling the anchor settle. But the Purist Collective is not defeated. They are masters of human chaos and they will adapt. The Purist Counterstrike, the weapon of doubt. The exposure of the Purist Collective's historical manipulation did not destroy them. It forced them to adapt and embrace their own form of chaos. The leader of the collective, an exiled human scientist named Dr. Cyrus Varick, was a master of psychological warfare who knew the Covenant's deepest vulnerability was not external, but the internal tension between Adrian and Sarai's disparate worldviews. Varick's counterstrike was silent and perfectly tailored. He didn't launch a fleet or a signal. He launched a whisper campaign using quantum encryption, feeding perfectly crafted, subtle data directly into the newly established human-Solivar joint education programs. The content was simple. Varick didn't argue that the Soul Evar were untrustworthy. He argued that the synthesis itself was a lie. He presented compelling, edited data showing that every successful maneuver, the Krellian barrier solution, the quantum tier anchor, the Ethel jump, relied entirely on Adrian's human chaos overriding Soul Evar logic and safety. The narrative was, Adrian is manipulating Sarai and the Soul Evar. The Covenant is built on human supremacy disguised as partnership. This quiet assault struck at the very heart of the Soul Evar identity, honor and respect. The core anchor immediately detected the threat, showing the probability threads of the synthesis unraveling not through conflict, but through mutual suspicion. Sarai, a warrior who valued transparency and directness, began to feel the weight of Varick's insidious logic. The data is structurally sound, Adrian, Sarai admitted one evening, reviewing the projected psychological impact on the Soul Evar integration faction. Varick highlights that in every crisis, the final decision required a leap of human irrationality. I provided the strength, but you provided the necessary betrayal of Soul Evar principles. I provided adaptation, Adrian countered, his patience strained. Soul Evar principles are too brittle for the future. You accepted that when you defeated Terran. But I accepted it, she insisted. I did not originate it. Varick is making my people believe that I am merely a tool of your chaos, not a partner. My honor, and my ability to lead the Soul Evar, is being systematically destroyed. The personal tension was profound. The success that defined their bond was now the very weapon being used to fracture it. Sarai, guided by Soul Evar honor, began instinctively to seek rational, ordered solutions to prove Varick wrong, slowing down critical joint projects. Adrian, under pressure, started relying more heavily on intuitive, chaotic unilateral decisions to maintain the pace, confirming Varick's narrative. The decisive test, the stellar cartography fiasco. The tension culminated during a crucial joint project, the mapping of the Krellian sector's temporal anomalies using the new dimensional drive technology. Sarai, aiming for maximum Soul Evar oversight and order, assigned a rigid, complex 4-week validation protocol before the human exploration vessels could utilize the drives. Adrian, viewing this as fatal procrastination that would allow Varick's influence to spread, used his authority as keeper to override the protocol and greenlight a small, chaotic human scout team, led by Dr. Lee, to begin unauthorized, immediate testing. The core anchor shrieked, displaying an immediate, catastrophic probability thread. Lee's scout team, operating outside the Soul Evar containment parameters, would encounter a temporal sinkhole and be instantly vaporized. The loss of life would be minimal, but the political fallout, the definitive proof that human chaos leads to preventable death, would immediately collapse the Covenant. Sarai confronted Adrian, her golden eyes blazing. You acted alone. You chose chaos over my command. This is exactly the manipulation Varric predicted. I chose speed over bureaucracy to defeat Varric. Adrian shouted, the pressure of the infinite possibilities finally breaking his composure. If we wait 4 weeks, we lose anyway. We lose when we lose trust. Sarai roared. You think you can see all futures, but you failed to see the most important one. The future where I trust you. The synthesis of will. The temporal sinkhole was 30 minutes away from Lee's scout team. Adrian knew he couldn't stop them conventionally, they were already operating on full chaos protocols. Sarai, despite her fury, regained her focus. You initiated the chaos. Now you must integrate it with order. Adrian grabbed the core anchor. I need an anchor point. Something I can use to collapse the sinkhole. The core anchor cannot collapse a natural temporal sinkhole without destroying this entire station, Sarai stated. But it can modulate the signal. I will take the synthesis fighter, the one you and I used to beat the Reapers. It has the most potent fusion of human and Solivar tech. Suicide, Adrian breathed, seeing the probability threads of her death. Necessary. I will fly into the sinkhole's gravitational fringe, Sarai continued, ignoring his fear. I will deploy a temporary Solivar containment field, designed only to survive for 3 seconds. You will use the core anchor to focus the sinkhole's chaotic gravitational energy onto my field. The Solivar woven field will contain the chaos, and the core anchor will channel that contained energy back into the spatial plane, stabilizing the region. The plan was a reverse of the quantum tier solution, using Solivar strength to contain chaos, and human intuition to channel it. I won't sacrifice you, Adrian whispered, his hands shaking over the anchor. You won't, Sarai said, placing a firm, stabilizing hand over his. You will trust my strength. You are the keeper of choice. I am the keeper of continuity. If we fall here, Varric wins. If we succeed, we prove that synthesis is stronger than suspicion. Adrian locked eyes with her, seeing not the warrior but the partner. He activated the anchor, focusing the terrifying, infinite power onto the single fragile containment field Sarai was about to deploy. 30 minutes later, Sarai's fighter barely escaped the gravitational fringe. The core anchor channeled the raw temporal energy, collapsing the sinkhole safely. Lee's team was saved. When Sarai returned, she didn't speak of the danger. She looked directly at Adrian. We succeeded because you trusted my discipline not to fail, and I trusted your chaos to find the channel. Varric's premise is flawed. The synthesis is not one culture overriding the other. It is codependency born of absolute trust. The personal conflict was resolved, forged not by words, but by shared, impossible action. The next target was clear, Dr. Cyrus Varric, the master of doubt. The successful stabilization of the temporal sinkhole finally shattered the insidious influence of the purist collective's propaganda. Sarai's near sacrifice proved that Solivar discipline was an active, necessary component of synthesis, not a weakness to be exploited. Trust was restored, but the source of the campaign, Dr. Cyrus Varric, remained at large. The core anchor revealed Varric's location, a small, forgotten, quantum-shielded habitat nestled within the asteroid belt of a neutral, fringe system. He was preparing his final, definitive attack, a massive, coordinated data pulse designed to simultaneously broadcast every fabricated piece of history and every distorted account of the Covenant's failures across all major galactic news channels. The goal was to flood the collective consciousness with doubt and paralyze the Alliance permanently. Varric's weapon is pure information chaos, designed to confuse and exhaust, Adrian observed, reviewing the anchor's projection. He's banking on the idea that if he presents enough compelling, contradictory data, people will simply retreat into their old, comfortable prejudices. We cannot silence the broadcast conventionally, Sarai stated. It would prove Varric's point that the Covenant controls information. We have to defeat his chaos with a greater, undeniable truth. Adrian formulated a plan that was audacious, leveraging the unique capabilities granted to them as keepers of synthesis. Varric's habitat is shielded against energy and conventional quantum interference, but not against temporal distortion. He believes time travel is the domain of myth, Adrian explained. We use the core anchor to open a microtemporal window, not to the past or future, but to the present moment of his original broadcast. The goal wasn't to stop the data pulse, but to edit it in real time with an unassailable truth. Varric is a master of human history. The only person who could counter his fabrication with absolute authority is the original architect of the Covenant's chaos, Adrian realized. Marcus Trent, Sarai breathed. Exactly. We won't bring Trent forward in time. That risks too much, Adrian confirmed. But we can use the anchor to create a real-time temporal echo of Trent's genuine chaotic personality and knowledge, and feed that echo directly into Varick's broadcast pulse. The broadcast of truth. They took the synthesis to the fringe system. The moment they entered the asteroid belt, the core anchor struggled against Varick's powerful quantum shielding. The shield is too strong, Sarai said, steadying the ship. You cannot hold a temporal window open for long enough. Then we integrate, Adrian said, looking at her. You are the Solivar anchor. You must use the ship's energy to form a physical containment field around Varick's habitat, acting as a temporal lens. I will use your shield stability to focus the anchor's power. Sarai executed a terrifyingly precise maneuver, wrapping the synthesis's containment field around the habitat. The field stabilized the region, giving Adrian the perfect, momentary stillness he needed. Adrian engaged the core anchor, channeling its vast power to pinpoint the quantum signature of Marcus Trent, not a man, but the historical, chaotic echo of his mind at the peak of his unconventional diplomatic genius. Inside the habitat, Dr. Varick smiled, watching his final devastating broadcast pulse launch, a wave of data designed to instill permanent doubt. Suddenly, the data pulse wasn't Varick's. It was hijacked by a wave of vibrant, anarchic energy. On screens across the galaxy, Varick's meticulously ordered broadcast was replaced. A holographic image of Marcus Trent, chaotic, slightly disheveled, but radiating an undeniable aura of brilliant purpose, appeared. Greetings, doubters, Trent's echo said, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of hindsight. I see you're worried about the messy truth of the Covenant. You think perfection is the goal? Perfection is stagnation. Trent then proceeded to dismantle Varick's entire data pulse, not with counter-evidence, but with the raw, chaotic context Varick had so carefully omitted. He showed the real fear, the real mistakes, and the real necessity of the Alliance, all delivered with the humor and messy honesty that Varick had tried to purge from history. You think the Alliance is a betrayal? Trent's echo concluded, his gaze seeming to pierce the galaxy. No. It is a necessity. The Solivar needed the chaos to survive. Humanity needed the structure to mature. We didn't form an alliance. We initiated an evolution. And it required the courage to embrace shame, failure, and the certainty that tomorrow will be harder than today. The broadcast ended. The truth, delivered by the architect of the synthesis, was undeniable. Doubt evaporated, replaced by context and profound respect for the difficult history they shared. Varick, defeated, lowered his data controls. He was captured minutes later, not as a terrorist, but as a delusional historian. The new role. Back on the synthesis, exhaustion hit Adrian like a physical weight. We used a ghost to save the future, he whispered. Sarai kissed him gently, a gesture of profound partnership. You didn't use a ghost, husband. You used possibility. You are the bridge between the dead time and the living future. They had defeated the enemies of the Covenant, external and internal. They had accepted the core anchor and survived their baptism as the keepers of synthesis. Now their roles were clear. The age of the impossible choice had begun, not with grand fleets, but with the subtle, continuous, terrifying work of negotiating the probabilities of existence. Adrian looked at the core anchor, which now pulsed with a steady, vibrant light. The future was vast, the threats were infinite, but the synthesis, the partnership of chaos and order, was the only certainty. The synthesis floated in the void near the Krellian sector, serving as a mobile command nexus. Adrian and Sarai, the newly confirmed keepers, sat before the core anchor. It pulsed, no longer with a warning of a possibility, but with the stark certainty of an inevitable convergence. It's not an empire, Sarai, Adrian murmured, tracing the anomaly on the holographic map. It's a void. A massive, accelerating absence of data. The anchor projected the timeline of the threat, a civilization known only in whispers as the Chronicents. They existed far beyond the galactic core, entities who had achieved ultimate technological dominance by eliminating all forms of entropy and random chance from their sphere of influence. They had created a society of absolute, frozen order. Their very existence was a denial of the fundamental chaos required for the universe to evolve. They are the true anti-synthesis, Sarai stated, gripping the edge of the console. Their goal isn't conquest, it's purification. They see our alliance, our blend of chaotic humanity and disciplined Solivar, as a terminal infection in the timeline. The anchor showed their impending strategy. The Chronicents were not sending a fleet. They were sending a single, massive temporal purge wave. This wave was designed to pass through the Alliance territory, systematically decohering every randomized quantum structure, from the unpredictable fusion drives to the bioresin panels of the synthesis beacon, and most terrifyingly the human brain's neural chaos. They would kill all complex, chaotic thought, leaving behind only perfectly structured, emotionless soul-ever life. They want to prune the timeline, Adrian whispered, horrified. They want to turn the soul-ever into perfect, predictable machines and erase humanity completely. It's the ultimate victory of order over possibility. The purge wave would hit the Krellian sector, the heart of their new trade nexus, in exactly 72 hours. Retreat was impossible. The wave traveled faster than any known soul-ever warp field, and attempting a chaotic jump would simply fuel the chronescent's ordered energy. We cannot stop the wave, we must change its nature, Sarai declared. It is pure mathematical order. It is designed to pass through any defense that relies on random chance. Adrian focused on the core anchor, viewing the precise temporal frequency of the incoming wave. It operates on a perfectly symmetrical, three-dimensional frequency. It's only programmed to recognize and destroy random chaos. He had a sudden, terrifying realization, drawing on the memory of the Krellian barrier and the temporal sinkhole. We don't fight the wave's order, we fight its symmetry, Adrian decided. The chronescents are so obsessed with order, they can't conceive of a defense that uses controlled, perfect chaos. We need to hit the wave with a fifth-dimensional anomaly, something that doesn't just resist chaos, but is designed to generate necessary chaos on command. Sarai immediately knew the tool, the synthesis beacon. The beacon is the only structure strong enough to channel the core anchor's power and durable enough to withstand the temporal shock, Sarai said. But it's passive. We need a way to turn its stable, perfect chaos into an active, destructive force. We use the beacon to reflect the wave, Adrian proposed. But not just reflect it. We use the core anchor to temporarily invert the wave's mathematical identity as it passes through the beacon. The chronescents send a wave of order. We will reflect a wave of pure, controlled chaos back at them. The plan was a colossal gamble, using the Covenant's symbol of fragile harmony as the weapon of ultimate, necessary disharmony. If the reflection is imperfect, Sarai warned, the wave won't reflect. It will simply pass through the beacon, destroying our most vital creation and hitting the core planets anyway. Then we will make it perfect, Adrian vowed. We need to plant a temporal marker at the precise center of the beacon, the exact spot where the human bioresin meets the soul-ever weaving. I need to be there at the nexus point. No, Sarai said, her voice iron. You are the keeper of choice. You must stay at the core anchor to modulate the fifth-dimensional frequency. I will be the physical conduit. I will plant the temporal marker and stabilize the beacon's core against the wave. The Alliance fleet, commanded by General Varric, had already evacuated the Krellian sector, leaving only the synthesis and the beacon positioned at the expected point of impact. Sarai, wearing only her light flight armor, launched a tiny shuttle toward the beacon. She carried the temporal marker, a small device powered by a remnant piece of the original watch's casing. Temporal purge wave confirmed, 60 seconds to impact. Adrian's voice crackled in her comms, strained as he fought the chronescent's influence using the anchor. The wave's order is fighting the anchor's chaos. It feels like my mind is trying to solve an impossible equation. Focus on my frequency, Adrian, Sarai commanded. She reached the core chamber of the beacon, where the crystalline soul-ever weaving met the vibrant human resins. I'm planting the marker. Stabilize the nexus. The moment she secured the marker, the temporal purge wave hit the outer layers of the beacon. The structure screamed, not with metal fatigue but with mathematical pain. It's working. Adrian gasped. The beacon is resisting the order. It's creating localized chaos. Sarai, hold position. The wave reached the nexus where Sarai stood. She pressed her hand onto the marker, anchoring herself. The raw temporal energy flooded the chamber, assaulting her soul-ever discipline with the absolute certainty of order. She fought it, channeling the memory of Adrian's reckless choices, Marcus Trent's culinary chaos, and the sheer, unpredictable joy of humanity. Now, Adrian. Invert the identity. Make order equal chaos. Adrian slammed his hand down on the core anchor, pouring every ounce of his chaotic intuition and his love for the warrior he might lose into the modulation. The anchor flared, forcing the wave to instantly reverse its mathematical sign. The beacon pulsed once, not with a harmonic signal, but with a blinding white light of inversion. The temporal purge wave hit the Alliance territory, but instead of destroying complex quantum structures, it restructured them. It didn't destroy chaos, it reinforced it, passing harmlessly through the star systems and roaring back into the void. The Chronicents, receiving their own perfectly inverted weapon, a wave of pure destructive chaos, were instantly paralyzed. Their society, built on absolute predictability, could not process the ultimate random chance. Their entire civilization froze, unable to evolve, unable to react. The ultimate order was defeated by its perfect opposite. Sarai returned to the synthesis, scorched and utterly exhausted but victorious. She looked at Adrian and they understood. They had not just saved the Alliance. They had used their synthesis to save the possibility of evolution itself. The core anchor now hummed with a soft, confident light. It no longer warned of immediate danger but showed the endless, winding streams of the future, now free from the Chronicents' rigid grip. They lost because they were too perfect, Adrian reflected, looking at the paralyzed void where the Chronicents had been. They made the one mistake Varric and Terran made. They assumed their own strength was sufficient. Sarai leaned against him, her armor cool against his tunic. We won because we embraced our flaws, Adrian Cole. Your chaos needed my discipline to live. My discipline needed your chaos to evolve. The Covenant is not a treaty, it is the law of evolution. The Alliance fleet returned, led by an awestruck Varric. The entire galaxy witnessed the impossible. The age of the impossible choice had solidified the Covenant's destiny. Adrian and Sarai, the keepers of synthesis, accepted their place. They were the silent architects, no longer fighting on the surface, but protecting the very flow of time. They knew the challenges would be endless, but they had the ultimate tool: absolute trust and the wisdom to know when to be chaotic and when to be ordered. The failed diplomat and the warrior princess stood on the bridge of the synthesis, the symbol of their union. They had not just married, they had become the guardians of infinite possibility, ensuring that the future remained a messy, chaotic, and gloriously unpredictable place.